Hey, I'm Nathan Crowley, the production designer of The Lake House, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. If your world is Wichita, Kansas, the birthplace of Pizza Hut, White Castle and Kirstie Alley, there's no more controversial building right now than Century II, a performing arts space built by John Hickman, a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, that's under siege from new development. Later on, we'll have a few minutes with Kyle Bergman of the upcoming New York Architecture and Design Festival, this year, of course, all online. And now, if he could stop humming Wichita lineman, here's Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
I am a lineman for the county.
Ooh.
That was a hit by megastar Glenn Campbell, who died a couple years back. In the 1960s, his career was meteoric. He had a TV series, top hits and albums, and the movie True Grit he filmed with good old John Wayne. One of those hit songs was Wichita Lineman, a song about a guy working for either the phone company or the power company, driving around looking for fallen lines. I am not making this up. Yes, he made a smash song out of this premise. It would be today like Taylor Swift belting out, "Your decaf flat white is ready," which of course would go platinum too, but I digress. Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Modernist Realtor Angela Roll and Nichiha.com/US Modernist.
Durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good, and you love feeling this good. Nichiha, Nichiha. Nichiha, Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Nichiha, Nichiha. Nichiha. That's N. C H I H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichiha.
Century II Performing Arts and Convention Center was built to commemorate Wichita's 1970 centennial. Designed by architect John Hickman, Century II was built by the city and the Urban Renewal Agency to provide a large and attractive civic center with a concert hall, convention hall, and exhibition hall. Later, an expo hall and an attached Hyatt Regency hotel. Our guest today is one of the best and hardest working modern preservationists in the country by far. With the mind of an auditor, the precision of a concert violinist, and the number-crunching abilities of an MBA, because she is all three, Celeste Bogart Racette leads the movement to save Century II from the bulldozer. Born in Wichita, she has a personal connection to the building, too. Her father was mayor of Wichita when it was built. Welcome, Celeste.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here today.
I am so happy to have you on. And before we get started, I read that Wichita has the largest dinosaur theme park in the country. Is that right? Is it like Jurassic Park?
There are a lot of unique artifacts in Wichita, not only the dinosaur remains and cosmonaut display in Hutchinson, But we have salt mines that are amazing and the world's largest ball of twine.
Oh, and you said cosmonaut display? Like
Yes, there's
Russian astronauts?
Yes.
But from Russia, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's a combination of different astronauts and different artifacts of different joint space missions. And so they're on display in the Hutchison.
I always heard that Kansas was a red state, but, I didn't realize how red you were.
Yes, Putin has a vacation home there. That's
I guess so.
No, he doesn't. Let's not carry it that far.
All right.
Okay. Well, let's start at the beginning, Celeste. It's the mid-'60s, and your dad is mayor. And how did the movement for Century II get going?
Well, the best way possible. It was put up to the voters, something unusual today. But the voters were allowed to decide if they wanted to pay for a new performing arts center and a new library. And in 1961, the bond issue was passed and the money was set aside to develop a state-of-the-art performing arts center and library, which they did. And then my dad, who was on city commission, that back then mayors rotated for just a one-year term, which prevented a concentration of power, they took turns being mayor and shepherding various consultants, architects, to see the fruition of the building in January of 1969. So it started with a vote to the citizens of Wichita.
And when did it get finished?
It was finished. Actually, it took two architects to finish it. John Hickman, as you said in the beginning of the podcast, was the first architect, along with the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation and Wesley Peters were involved in phase one. John Hickman tragically committed suicide in the middle of the architectural plans, and so Roy Varenhorst, who was part of his architectural firm, then took over and completed designing the building. Construction started with a blast of dynamite in 1966 on the site, and after many years of construction, it had a grand inaugural opening, January 1969, with a Democratic mayor, Robert Docking. And the festivities were for all the citizens. The governor had his inaugural ball. He had a parade down Wichita, and the opening of Century II commenced with Holiday on Ice and many special events back in that time. So January 1969, it opened 8 years later after the bond issue was passed.
Now, while people start Googling Century II so they can get an idea of what it looks like, if you can, for our audio audience, try to describe the building for us.
Well, it's an unusual building, but it's very beloved, and it's been part of our landmark for years. But it looks like a blue UFO. And when you fly into Wichita, you recognize you're in Wichita. It's been featured in the movie with George Clooney, Up in the Air, where he flies into our airport. You see a round, 5-acre round domed building from the top. It's only 2 stories high, and the sides represent columns, 36 columns, all the way running around the building that are a buff-colored sandblast plaster and concrete, which represents the waving wheat of Kansas. The blue represents the Kansas sky, and there's 3 parapets. Believe me, I didn't know this before I started writing the National Registry paperwork, but parapets, which represent the horizontal bands when you're standing in the Kansas prairie, and the sky meets the ground with a strong horizon line. So it represents Kansas. And the buff color, of course, is wheat. And the Native Americans used to camp right on that spot where the big Arkansas River meets the little Arkansas River. It was a sacred area. And the rounded shape of the dome itself represents the wigwams, or the top of the structures of their own buildings when they camped along the river. So it's unique to Wichita, but it does look like a UFO.
In Arkansas, did they say the Arkansas River?
They do. We sometimes refer to it as the Arkansas River, but I'm not sure which persuasion your audience prefers. But
I think I like that better. It gives a certain zing to it. This building opened up, and it looks like something that Frank Lloyd Wright would have designed, and it actually has a connection to him, right?
Yes, it does. In phase one of the planning for the architecture, the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, Wesley Peters was involved with John Hickman in designing the shape of the building. Frank Lloyd Wright, as you know, had loved and designed domed, rounded buildings, and he liked to use design elements that were specific to the particular building and the environment in which he was putting the building. Both John Hickman and Roy Varenhorst studied at Taliesin West during their architectural career and were considered masters of Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. They were also both friends with, interestingly enough, one of our Native American artists, Francis Black Bear Boson, who is well known for a statue at the confluence of the Little Arkansas River and the Big Arkansas River with the Keeper of the Plains, and it symbolizes the Native American entity standing above the rivers, signaling with feathers in his headdress to the spirits of the earth. And they were friends, and there's a beautiful painting that's actually outside of our offices. It's not mine, I wish it was, but it's called Wichita, My Son, My Native Son, and it was drawn by Black Bear Boson, and it shows both Century II and the former public library in the background, and along the river are the wigwams that the Native American Indians lived in at the time. So this tie to this spot and this area in Kansas is particularly unique to us and the citizens of Wichita.
And how big is Wichita?
Wichita is about 350,000 people in the center part, but it does spread out. It's grown west and east and north and south. So Sedgwick County, which is the surrounding county, is much larger.
And in the 60s when Century II was built, was the city smaller, I assume?
Yes, it was smaller,
Okay.
but it was already known for being the aircraft capital of the world. We
that's
started
true.
with Cessna, Gates Learjet, Boeing, Beechcraft, Hawks. We had all of the premier aircraft industry, and during World War II, we had a particular population explosion of workers who came to Wichita to work on the planes. We still have a lot of aircraft industry, including Airbus, which is not a U.S. aircraft company, but Boeing has split off some of its divisions into Washington, as you know. There's other places where aircraft is built, but we are still considered one of the premier cities for manufacturing aircraft industry.
And it's important to have a landmark that's visible from an aircraft to
Well, come to
mark
think of
your
it,
city.
it seems appropriate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And Harrison Ford still flies in here annually to get his plane service, so we see him spotted around Wichita at his favorite
Harrison Ford?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, when he's not crashing it, which he does have a habit of doing. He's been walking away a couple times. He's been quite a lucky dude.
Yes.
Most people don't know, in terms of Wichita's air fame, that you're really like a giant Exxon service station for aircraft. I mean, that's where the aircraft go to get fixed or to get inspected, right? It's not like a giant passenger airport. It's for repairs.
Right, and there is a training facility as well. On top of that, we've got McConnell Air Force Base, which flies in tankers and also does, test runs of various aircraft that they're getting ready to put into production for military operations. So we have a very strong military presence. And at one time, we had one of the missile silos during the heated nuclear wars that wasn't far from Wichita.
Has that been converted to something fun now, like a restaurant?
Yeah,
or
now
is it
it's,
still...
now it's an expensive millionaires condo association for people who are foreseeing the end of the world or a pandemic crisis where they can actually live underground in relative safety and comfort of home away from home. So you have to be a millionaire to actually see it now.
Okay, talk about your gated community. Wow.
Yeah. Going back to John Hickman, I understand he designed a famous service station in Hayesville.
Yes, he did.
That featured a batwing design. That sounds fun. Tell us about that.
So, yes, John Hickman is well known for many different types of buildings that he designed, but the Vickers Petroleum Building is one that made it onto the National Registry. And absolutely, George, it has what's called a batwing design in that it juts up sharply from the ground. It also displays notes of his past in aviation. Hickman was also in aircraft industry during the war. And the batwing design has this light, lofty-seeming roof shell, and it is on the National Registry. It's an ambitious design, and it just shows his love of aircraft industry.
And we'll talk about the National Registry in just a minute, but it's important for buildings to get on there because it establishes them as critical to a community's history.
That's correct. It's a lot of work to write, but if you're lucky and have the help of some architects, it's really not the chore you might think it would be.
Now, Century II goes on in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to be a host to a number of performing arts venues. There's theater, there's music, there's concerts. This keeps going. And were there any kind of notable events that happened there? Like, was there ever a political convention in Wichita, or did the Rolling Stones ignite something one night?
Yes. We've had a lot of, I wouldn't say the Rolling Stones, I'm going to date myself, but I'll never forget seeing Elton John play the piano in concert hall with high platform boots and sparkly sequins and big rhinestone glasses. His skill on the piano is hopping up and down in platform boots. I remember vividly seeing Elton John. Jack Benny performed with the Wichita Symphony, and it was amazing to hear him joke with the symphony and then pick up his own violin and play with an amazing ability.
I forgot he could play.
He could play, and I was astonished because, as George alluded to, I was a violinist and had a scholarship to KU, Kansas University, which I turned down to be an accounting major, but I played violin for many years myself. Wichita Symphony has performed there. Francois Hubrex was one of our conductors. He's now gone on to perform with many esteemed international orchestras. Music Theater of Wichita has performed there for many years. And Mary Jane Teal is a small theater that has held children's performances. It's a unique little theater in mauve colors and deep, rich hues, and it's just a very intimate, unique little theater that's modern and very classy for its time. We've got Exhibition Hall, we've got Convention Hall, and Convention Hall actually hosted Frank Sinatra. And that was a sold-out performance where they had a dinner theater and then dancing and singing. And, of course, Frank Sinatra is the featured guest. We've had Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford. Many various presidents have come to speak. In fact, I saw Bernie Sanders there not too long ago. So we get many different politicians still coming through Wichita and using the venues. It's a neat building. It's a unique building, and it's still being used for its intended purpose from 1969. I think that makes it pretty unique.
Now, let's fast forward to 2019. When did you first hear that the building was threatened?
There had been grumblings about the building being outdated or not quite up to the new standards, like in some of the newer Riverwalk developments in Texas, or just grumblings. But it wasn't until I read in the paper an editorial saying that there was going to be the first public meeting of a group that had been hired to design architectural drawings for their vision of the riverfront, that I started getting interested and attended that meeting July 31st of last year. But what was so interesting is I took the time to gather up some pictures of Century II and the original inaugural booklet that had been drawn by Roy Varenhorst with these amazing drawings and photographs. And I went there and I said, when are we going to talk about Century II? And the lady there said, we're not talking about Century II.
Uh-oh.
And I said, okay. I was so stunned. And I said, well, when do we get to ask questions about the proposal? And she snapped back at me rather snottily, we're not taking questions from the audience. So I looked around the room and I realized that people were glad-handing each other. You could tell that this was people who knew each other, that had already planned this presentation, and that this was pretty much a done deal, that there was going to be no interaction from the audience. So I went downstairs. It's a two-story building. There was an empty table where I sat down and just laid out my pictures in this amazing booklet of the inaugural. And people would come in, and if they had questions, I'd say, do you want to see some unique pictures of Century II? And I'd show them to them, and they'd get excited about these drawings I had from my father's private collection. And then they'd go on to the event upstairs. Well, pretty soon, a line of 4 people stood in front of this little table I was at so that you couldn't see me. But friends I knew who were coming in would see me, say, hi, Celeste, what are you doing? And they'd break through this line in front of the table and say, what are you showing? I'd say, oh, I've just got pictures of Century II. So it was obvious that I was still having an impact on people who were curious about Century II. At that point, this arrogant little bossy lady, I don't know if I should mention her name or not, Tammy Bradley, of the public relations firm Bothner & Bradley, walked right up to me, stood in front of the table, pointed her finger at me, and said, you have to leave. I said, what? She said, you're hijacking our meeting, and I'm telling you to leave this building. And I said, stunned, I thought this was an open meeting. She said, no, this is a private meeting. We've paid for the venue, and I'm telling you, you have to leave. So unfortunately, I didn't know what else to do except pick up my display and tell my patient husband, who was sitting behind me reading his iPad, that we were being ordered to leave the building. As I was picking up my documents, a reporter from the Wichita Eagle was coming down the stairs. He'd heard about my display and the historic artifacts I had, and he saw her bossily ordering me out of the building. So he got her name, he got my name, and there was an article in the paper the next day about riverfront legacy, the plans for the riverfront, this first public meeting, and oh, by the way, they made a lady leave for sitting at a table showing pictures of Century II. And after that article appeared in the paper, people started reaching out to me to say they had been there, they thought my display was amazing, and they were horrified that I had been asked to leave because they knew I wasn't waving a flag or shouting in a megaphone. I was merely sitting at a table if people were interested to show them pictures of Century II. So that's when my support for this effort began.
So this riverfront complex, or whatever it's called, would be replacing and be put in the same place as Century II.
Not only Century II, but what's so interesting, of all the 5 scenarios they presented to the public over the next few months, it all ended up being channeling into what I could tell from that first meeting, obliterating the former public library, a brutalist-style modern building, Century II, all of the buildings, including the boathouse that the Koch family had renovated and paid for to store one of their former American Cup yachts, and just destroy and obliterate all of the buildings, the parks, the structures along the East Riverbank to put up nondescript retail establishments and a performing arts center, and a 2-story underground parking garage in the water table of the Arkansas River. $1 billion vision is what it turned out to be.
So they kicked you out for having this historical display.
Yes.
And you went home and you didn't just, start watching HGTV. You started getting organized. What did you start to do? And how did your movement to save the building grow?
After that meeting, we had to put a rocking chair in the back of my car, and I drove that night to Denver, where my first granddaughter was born in the NICU at Denver, Colorado. So I spent a week in Colorado with her birth and delivery, and then returned. And as I was driving back, that's when my phone started ringing with people who were reaching out to me. So after a week in Denver and returning, Greg Kite, who's president of the Historic Preservation Alliance in Wichita, reached out to me. There were other folks in Wichita, John Todd, who knew my father, who reached out to me. And so over the next few weeks, we started thinking of how we could fight back, how we could have a voice. I guess not fight back as much as have a voice, because citizens were effectively silenced at that building. And then I started going on the internet and found Dee Starkey, who's a docent at Allen House, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Wichita, Robert McLaughlin, who's with KC Modernist in Kansas City, George Smart, of course, U.S. Modernist, who was so gracious in offering me advice. And we decided, Greg Kite and I, that we would have a free, open public meeting at Century II in the small theater, Mary Jane Teal, open to the public, where we started presenting a panel of experts and a slide display to the public on how unique Century II was. So we had a public meeting in September, in October. Then we had a meeting in Corbin, which is another Frank Lloyd Wright designed building on the Wichita State University campus. And we started getting a groundswelling of people to help us. And then other people, John Todd, who's active here in Wichita with politics, and some other wealthy benefactors, Bill Warren, who's with the Warren Theaters, jumped on board to say how could they help us. And they started giving us funds. We had been selling T-shirts at this point. They gave us funds to actually begin what's called a Municipal Initiative Petition, which kicked off with the voter rally in the cold, cold winter of Kansas on January 13th with the winds blowing, and we had a groundswell of people show up at this outdoor rally outside City Hall to start signing a municipal petition to get Century II, saving the building and the library, to a citizen vote on the ballot this November. We've then been publishing a newsletter. We're on Facebook. We have our own website, a wonderful volunteer-designed yard signs that we have probably distributed 2,000 yard signs free to the public, and buttons to promote our cause. We ended up with over 17,000 signatures that we delivered to the mayor last Friday. We appeared before the Wichita Historic Preservation Board Monday, July 13th, and they voted in approval of the historic nomination of Century II and the former public library. And on Tuesday, City Council approved funds to start Century II renovations that have been deferred for 11 years.
Wow.
On August 1st, we go before the State Historic Board to get before the State Registry, and then from there it will go to the National Registry. So yes, we're now well on our way. With a two-prong approach, I might add. First, to do this petition to make historic buildings be voted on by citizens before they're destroyed. That should be on the ballot in November. And then two, to get it on the historic registry so that there can be tax credits and renovation grants available to take care of the building, which has been neglected for these past few years. Has it been a lot of work? Absolutely. I'm an accountant. I knew nothing about architecture. I had to be educated in even what parapets are and how you describe certain characteristics of Century II, such as the spheres that rise up through the upper parapet at 50 feet.
And this woman that you almost didn't name, the PR lady who kicked you out of that original meeting, did she show up at your meetings that you held that were open to the public at Century II?
Of course not. Nope. And the next time I saw her was at another one of the Riverfront Legacy meetings. She was hiding at a table with a ball cap over her eyes, an embarrassment that someone would recognize her, because actually she would be a case study in how not to do public relations for a high-priced event.
Well, isn't the irony here that if she had left you alone, none of this resistance might have formed?
Might have formed, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Totally ironic. But God bless her.
God bless her. Well, there's more to this story, and we'll be back in just a moment after this word from modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In her continuing fantasy life, modernist realtor Angela Roll was hired to work for Britain's MI6. Not as a spy, but to build a secret tunnel so the Prime Minister and Hugh Grant could enter and exit the building without anyone knowing. In appreciation, she was invited to 4 royal weddings and a funeral, but after accidentally spilling a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1787 on someone's mother, who had a crown, she was burn noticed to Prague in the Czech Republic. Angela was broke with only a 9mm Ruger, a circular saw, and a red ball gown. She studied architecture by day and built portable dance floors by night. It was on one of her dance floors at the Finnish embassy that she waltzed into the arms of international man of mystery, Eric of Helsinki, whom she later married. On their honeymoon aboard the Queen Mary II, she narrowly got her circular saw past customs in New York via her cloak of invisibility, because all heroines have one, to become a formidable real estate agent with architecture training, deftly dealing with unreasonable sellers, unrealistic buyers, incompetent builders, and slow bureaucrats, while unlocking the superpower of modernism the world has yet to fully appreciate. Modernist realtor Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. We're talking with Celeste Bogart Racette of the Century II project, a significant building in Wichita, Kansas, that she has been working like crazy to save from demolition. Celeste, it would be easy to cast this as, good guys versus bad guys, but it would seem just from first brush that the developers, if they were really smart, would just leave Century II alone, build all the other structures they want to do, and come out pleasing everybody.
Yes, that's what they should have done. And that would have actually been something that we support, because we've never been against building a new performing arts center. There's plenty of room along the river. In fact, we have a TIF district that's a failed development. It's called Water Walk Development, with a Gander Mountain that's now empty. They could have just repurposed that building. They could have built new. We're not against anyone who wants to use the space. We just feel like saving Century II and the former public library and perhaps repurposing them is not only the most economically feasible alternative, but it's the one that would have won the most widespread public support. So I don't know what they were thinking, actually. Populist architects actually came from San Francisco, And in their plans, they had a little area to swim in the Arkansas River. So they're not from Wichita. You would not freely take your kids and swim in the Arkansas River. It's dirty, and it's just a neighborhood chlorinated pool would be much better.
Well,
so
maybe
you
just have to have an open mind and try it one time, and then make sure you shower afterwards.
Yeah. So they just didn't really do their homework, and I think they could have engaged the community if they had open dialogue, but they were so, I hate to use the word arrogant, but it's what comes to mind, in that their way was the only way, and they bulldozed their way with their plans, and spending $700,000 for these unfeasible plans was just a waste of taxpayer money, unfortunately.
So right now it's the end of July in 2020. And what are the next steps for the process of preserving the building?
The next steps for preserving the building is August 1st. There will be the review by the State Historic Preservation Board on the National Registry paperwork for approval. And then after the primary, there's a group of us that are continuing to meet. And what we want to do next is guide City Council in applying for historic tax credits and renovation grants to take care of 11 years of deferred maintenance. Now, you may ask yourselves, who deferred maintenance on the building? Good question. City Manager Robert Layton admitted to me in a one-on-one meeting that he was the one that made the decision to defer maintenance on Century II. And since I had filed the Kansas Open Records Act request to get this information, I knew back in 2009 the roof had some leakage problems that put the roof in what's called poor condition, and it was not fixed even up until today. So there is what I would term a bad guy in this scenario, and that is our city manager, Robert Layton, who deferred maintenance on the building without telling taxpayers he was doing so. So we also want to put a little pressure on city council to find a new city manager who will provide adequate oversight of our public buildings and actually apply to take care of the buildings. So that's step 2. Then step 3 is Bill Warren, who is one of the movie theater magnates. He's got a lot of experience in buildings that he's built, is going to take his engineers in there and figure out what needs to be done to shore up the roof and take care of structural problems and bring it back to its state-of-the-art and actually turn the spire on. That was part of the vision of John Hickman and Roy Varenhorst, a lit spire that's been dark for the past 10 years.
Well, Celeste, there is a silver lining to all of the deferred maintenance. You may not know this, but George and I have a policy here on U.S. Modernist Radio that whenever someone refers to deferred maintenance, we do a shot. And so I'm like 9 sheets to the wind right now with everything you just described.
Really?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Funny.
It's a drinking game.
Yes, it's a drinking
really
game.
That's hysterical. Oh, that's so funny. Well, after you've had enough shots, you'll just have to fly into Wichita and go out to the Cosmosphere and see the U.S. and Russian spaceflight artifact.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't that be a blast?
It would be.
Then end up with the largest ball of twine.
I've read about that twine for years, but I didn't realize that it was in Wichita.
Well, it's not in Wichita, but it's in Kansas. It's what the Cosmosphere is in Hutchinson, which is not far from Wichita, and the ball of twine is in a smaller town further out in the plains of Kansas. I'd show you a good time, both of you.
Well, how tall is the ball of twine, just for comparison purposes?
Oh, my Lord. At least as high as a building.
Okay.
So that's a big ball of twine.
Like the world's biggest chair is supposedly in High Point, George. North Carolina has big things, too.
There you go.
And the biggest shopping basket is a building somewhere. There's all these kinds of Americana.
Yep.
We could probably talk about with
big
Charles
here.
Phoenix.
Well, now I'll end with telling you one fact that you probably don't know about the building. Do you know how many pounds of steel are in the building?
12?
No, 4 million pounds of structural steel. And you know how many miles of steel reinforcing bar are in the building? 600 miles.
Oh, that's rounding errors.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
4 million pounds of structural steel. So that is a solid building. When we have tornado warnings during music theater, they have actually routed people into that structure for safety.
Wow. Because, Kansas is also known for tornadoes. I saw a movie about it once.
Yeah. And not only that, but back to the dinosaurs and back in the years and years ago, Kansas was underwater. And that's where the National Gypsum Company found what they needed to make the plaster. They mined it out of a place called a mine located in Sun City, Kansas, to do the plaster work in Century II. It required 25 railroad carloads of plaster. So because of our unique geography back in the dinosaur era, we have the chemicals you need to make plaster that was plastered inside Century II.
Celeste, you are a factotum. I think that's the word, isn't it?
Oh, all due to that deferred maintenance.
And another shot.
Yeah.
Celeste, I think it's really cool that you have taken this on, and I want to compliment you on this, in a way that is much more organized than most community efforts. I mean, you have really applied your skills as an auditor to auditor the hell out of all the officials and boards and committees that have been involved in this building.
And you play violin.
I play violin, and at the end of my career, I was a fraud investigator for the FDIC. That's when I lived a year in Atlanta. And then I came back to Wichita as a fraud examiner for New York region, Kansas City region, and Atlanta region. Flew all over the United States with fraud. So I've been threatened, I've been lied to, and I've been bribed. And I tell you what, once someone pushes me away like that or doesn't allow public voice or input, you've taken on a fighter. And they took on the right person to fight them over this.
Well, it all depends on your perspective, I guess. Right or wrong.
Coming this fall on Netflix, Celeste Racette, auditor. See it this fall. Yeah, you've got a TV series here coming,
really?
Celeste.
But I have to say, George, I have to say thank you to you when I called you out of desperation, reaching out to people who knew architecture, unlike myself, to help me with what I needed to do. George, you were invaluable in helping me know what to do, how to bring people's skills into this effort, and how to work with diverse personalities and political backgrounds to make this a nonpartisan effort of citizens of Wichita who just love the building and love our city. So kudos to you, George, in answering a call from what was I, frantic at that time? A frantic citizen who had just at a loss as to what to do next. So thank you for helping me.
Well, you're welcome. Frantic citizens are our specialty here at U.S. Modernist.
Yes, sometimes.
Yes, it's been a journey of love.
Looking forward, Celeste, is there any potential for reconciliation here? I mean, can at some point you and the Riverside developers get together and say, hey, look, let's try to slice up the booty here and figure out a way to move forward? Because you figure that if they saved Century II, that would be a lot less construction cost for them. And think of all the goodwill they would get.
Exactly. And right now, because of COVID, we have a $50 million deficit in the city budget and a $600 million deficit in the state budget. So can we afford a $1 billion development? Absolutely not. They're looking at where to cut quality of life services. So one thing, Wayne Bryant, who's the director of Music Theater of Wichita, he wanted a new building, but he was somewhat conciliatory when he realized that the Wichita Historic Board was going to vote for the nomination. And I applauded him for that. One thing we've always supported is if we want a new, smaller performing arts center that's devoted to not exhibitions, not convention, not a small theater, but say performing arts, there would be funds that he could fundraise with some of his benefactors, some of the wealthy people in Wichita, use maybe some of the plans that Riverfront Development had already envisioned for a performing arts center, and do private fundraising and build it, because there is space along the river to build a new performing arts.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that because he had a conciliatory approach, and because we've been broad-based, we've never said no to further development, just no to this destruction of all the buildings, that we should be able to work together, absolutely. And I did thank him in front of the Wichita Historic Preservation Board for his softened approach.
Well, how can people reach you, Celeste, and your organization if they want to help out or contribute or otherwise be part of your effort?
We have a website, www.save2.org. And on that website, we have a display of the pictures, the architectural drawings, the newsletters that have been published, and also our T-shirts that have helped us as a grassroots campaign fundraise for these free open public meetings and the 2,000 yard signs that sit in people's yards that say Save Century II. So if you want a unique T-shirt, they're on that website, and there's a link to our Facebook page, which is at Wichita C2, and another one that I'm not administrator of, so I have to be very non-political on his page, but we also have a Facebook page at Save C2. So I would love for them to go on the website. You can give us your contact information. Let us know if you want a T-shirt. I'll mail you a T-shirt with a small donation to the Historic Preservation Alliance, and would love to have your input as we march forward to renovate the building and turn the spire on. And we actually heard from someone from Texas just the other day. I received a letter in the mail with a $100 donation, and I sent him a T-shirt off last week. But it was very encouraging to hear from other fans of modernist architecture, like the Brutalist Library. That's a unique building that now we're paving the way for future nominations. If people want to know how to nominate that building, now there's a set of paperwork that nominated that library that's also marching along with my nomination for Century II.
Celeste, thank you so much. It's been such a cool thing to talk with you and hear the story about Century II, and please keep us posted on how things go.
Thank you. Absolutely. And thank you again, George, and you too, Tom, because we couldn't be here today if we hadn't had folks like you that reached out to help someone like me in the prairie lands of Kansas. Thanks, you guys.
You're welcome. Thank you for being not so well behaved.
You're welcome.
Since we recorded with Celeste Racette in July, there's been a lot going on with the movement to save Century II in Wichita. Now we'll magically time travel to October and rejoin Celeste for an update. She and her intrepid team have been in the Kansas news, in court, and have discovered quite a bit of hanky-panky down at Wichita City Hall. Well, not exactly hanky-panky. Maybe it's hijinks, monkey business, poppycock, buffoonery, hokey-pokey, or just old-fashioned misleading the public about where the money goes. Celeste, what's the latest?
Well, thank you, George, and good morning. The latest is that we have filed an appeal. The city ruled against us in the lawsuit they filed against our petition to save Century II. So we have an appellant attorney who is going to represent us in the state of Kansas Court of Appeal, and we have filed the notice of our appeal. So that's the next step in the process, is we are fighting back against the judge's decision in the city's lawsuit against our petition. In the meantime, I've been looking at city finances, and yes, there has been some hanky-panky, or what we call here in Kansas, pay for play, where donations that have been made to some of the city council members has allowed them to dip into the funds that take care of Century II for their own private development projects. Sounds interesting, doesn't it?
Is there a Darth Vader lurking around somewhere and a TIE fighter?
Well, we've got Luke Skywalker representing us, so we feel like the Force is with us here.
So basically, you had your referendum all lined up because of your petition, and the court invalidated it. Why?
Well, what's interesting is the court knew there was going to be an appeal. So going into this, the court had already made up its mind that they were going to side with the city. The city's argument was first that it was too broad in what constitutes a historic building. And then their second argument was it was too detailed. So they wanted it both ways. We couldn't win. It was either too broad or too detailed. So in other words, they just wanted to invalidate our petition. End of discussion. So this has really become a constitutional question of whether Kansas residents and citizens can actually make law. And so it's becoming a constitutional argument we're taking before the Court of Appeals.
Wow. Is it still going to be on the ballot in November?
No, unfortunately, it won't be on the ballot because since they invalidated the petition, we won't get it on the ballot. But to appease us, Mayor Whipple, who's our current mayor, got the city council to approve a resolution where at some point in the future, we don't know when, they will hold a non-binding vote where citizens can say if they want to save Century II or not. But since it's non-binding, that doesn't make much difference anyway. So that's supposedly going to happen down the road somewhere and at a special cost to the taxpayers because it will be a special election.
That sounds just delightful. It's kind of like a marriage proposal. Will you marry me? It's non-binding.
Yeah.
I guess you could say that. Yeah, I think he thought we would go away once he patted us on the back and said we're going to do a non-binding resolution. But he doesn't know us very well because you know what? We've moved into long-term offices. We've got more space. We've got a donor who matched the donations made up through October 5th, and we have prepaid our appeal. We've got funds now to see us through the next year of this fight for the appeal. We're going to be speaking again. We're selling T-shirts. We're giving away yard signs and buttons. We're digging into city finances. We are now looking at city council elections next year. We are getting even more active than before.
Paging the ghost of Mike Wallace.
Yeah. Hey, Netflix, if you're listening, we'd like Meryl Streep to play Celeste in the film.
Oh, that would be quite a compliment.
Well, Celeste, thank you very much for this update. We appreciate it.
Yeah, good luck.
You bet. Thank you so much. Bye.
About this time of year, the leaves change. The temperature finally gets decent in North Carolina as crushing humidity goes on holiday. And I have the privilege of traveling to New York City for the Architecture and Design Film Festival, or ADFF, one of the best events in that Venn diagram between film and architecture we all love. Over the years, we've brought you great podcast guests from New York like Mina Chow, Jake Gorse, Elisa Namias, Akira Bach, and Lena Borch Hansen. Today, it's wonderful to have Kyle Bergman back with us. He's the founder and executive director of the ADFF, which opens this year online this Thursday, November 19th, and runs through December 3rd. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, George. How are you?
Good. Like so many of us, your work's been thrown a giant curveball by the virus.
Yes, we have all. This year is one big curveball for all of us in so many ways. I don't know if I'm a good curveball hitter or not, but we'll find out in the fall if I'm able to do something with ADFF. But we're going to try to do something with it, actually. You know, it's kind of interesting. Even though it's a curveball, sometimes it's an opportunity. And we have been doing the festival for so long in specific cities at specific times, and it brings lots of people together, and it's a pretty fun event, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to make the festival available for everyone throughout the United States and Canada. So the upside is it's pretty exciting to think about making this available to a much broader and wider audience. So we're going to go with the curveball and try to go with the pitch.
At what point did you suspect that it was not going to go as planned this year?
Oh, my God. It felt like middle of March when everything just dropped out and things were being canceled. I mean, actually, we canceled our March event that was supposed to be at the National Building Museum and looking at all those other events. And in mid-March, I actually came up to my house in Vermont and was thinking, oh, my God, it's going to be a year and a half before we have another festival. Because at that point, I had never really gone down the path of doing online screenings. But after sitting in Vermont for a couple of days, for a couple of weeks, I realized, okay, let's try some online screenings. So this spring, we did a number of them. And the online screenings that we did in the April, May, and June went very well. And there's a lot of positive things that come out of it. So I am actually super excited for the ADFF 2020 with all the films being online. And I think each year this will be part of our annual cycle of films where we would do the films live and also do them online.
That's good. I'm happy for that development.
Yeah, me too.
What are some of the architecture films coming up this year?
So we have 17 programs of films. 2 of them are short film programs, and the 15 programs are each with a feature-length film. And we have some U.S. and Canadian premieres, a couple that are super exciting. We have one on Alto, the Finnish architect, a beautiful film talking about his life. And what I really love about it, it talks about how important his wife was. Actually, both of his wives were in his architecture and design process. And I think it really hadn't come out as full as it should have been. So the Alto film is, besides showing his beautiful work, really, it's kind of like a love letter to both his first wife, and then she passed away, and his second wife. It's really their working relationship is pretty impressive.
And what else?
We have a film on Albert Frey, the Swiss architect. Actually, years ago, I know you did an interview with Gorse, and Jake did a film called Frey 1, The Architectural Envoy, and that was done in 2018. And now in 2020, Part 2, Frey 2, The Architectural Interpreter, and it really covers Frey's life from 1939 to his death in the late 90s. Basically, the work that we mostly know Frey for is work in Palm Springs. So it's a great in-depth look, like Part 1. And we're going to offer both films. So Frey Part 2 is the new film, but for the same ticket, you can watch Frey 1 and or Frey 2. So
it's a double feature.
Double feature. Yeah, a self-imposed double feature that you can watch in your own living room with your own popcorn and your own whiskey or whatever you like to drink.
All the Frey you can eat.
Right. All the Frey you can eat, exactly. So it's really great to see them both. I mean, originally, Kirk Brown, who's the director of design and scheme and the producer, and Jake, originally they were going to do one film on Frey, but they got so into it that they could hardly put it into 90 minutes, and so that's how it came up in Frey 1 and Frey 2. But I think the fun way to do it is to see both of them. And the first one's 65 minutes, and the second one's 83, so it's not that long.
Yeah.
A little, like, snack in between, and it's a perfect double feature.
Yeah, like a mini-series.
It's a little mini-series, a mini-series, exactly.
Yeah, I had fun when I was talking with Jake Gorse and his wife Tracy that there should be a Frey 3 on ice. The ice version.
I remember that.
That's cool. I would like that. Frey 3.
Now, I'm happy to hear that there's going to be a screening of the new Paul Williams movie.
Yeah. So Paul Williams was the first African-American architect who was a member of the AAA, and he's got an amazing story. Grew up in Los Angeles in a tough childhood, but he always wanted to be an architect. And it's this great story, besides showing the great buildings that he's did, but his perseverance to become an architect and to get all the clients that he got. So it tells that whole story. I mean, some of the things I love, he was designing a lot of residences in communities that he wasn't allowed to live in, which is pretty wild to think of. I mean, the racism was just horrific. And he found out when he was working with his white clients that they were kind of uncomfortable sitting next to him when they were looking at sketches and drawings. So he learned how to draw in perspective upside down and work upside down so he could sit across the table from them and do his table and do his drawings and work with them. So even though they were hiring a black architect, there was still racism happening. And so he figured out a way to get through all those things. And it's just a testament to his kind of creative genius and his perseverance. It's a fantastic film. And we're going to actually offer that film for free. Actually, the National Building Museum is a co-sponsor of that film, and that's going to be available for free for anyone who wants to watch it.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. This film is a long time coming. I'm surprised that there's not been a strong Paul Williams documentary before now.
Yeah, I am too. But, like so many of these films, they take 3, 5, 7 years to make, and this one also took that long. And it's like doing a building. It always takes longer than you think it's going to be.
And there's probably also the part of fundraising, too, which can take a while.
The whole thing. It's, there's new things that come up about the whole process.
How can people sign up for your festival, Kyle? Where do they go to get tickets and find more information?
So they go to our website, which is adfilmfest.com, and there you can see all the films and you can purchase tickets. You can purchase for an individual screening, and the general admission price is $10. There are a number of discounts available for AA members and other industry members. There's also, we sell what we call our fistful package, which is five films, any 5 films you want for $40. Or you can get the all-access ticket, which gives you one screening for every film in the series, and that's $110. And the festival dates are November 19th through December 3rd. And the other nice thing is once you start watching a film, you have 48 hours to complete it or watch it. And in each film program, there is going to be an introduction, the film, and a Q&A after the film.
Nice.
So, for example, the film Tokyo Ride, which is a U.S. and Canadian premiere by the famous filmmakers Illa Becca. They did House Live.
Becca and Lemoyne?
Becca and Lemoyne, exactly. So we're going to show their new film, Tokyo Ride, about Nishikawa, who is one of the architects partners of Sana, the Japanese firm. And for an introduction of that, we're actually going to have a couple introductions. One introduction is going to be with Paolo Antonelli and Toshiko Mori, the architect.
Mm-hmm.
Give a little introduction. We'll also have a second introduction with Sharon Price, who is the woman behind Grace Farm, which is one of the buildings outside New York in New Canaan, an amazing building. So it's get her perspective. And then we'll do a Q&A afterwards with the directors and Nishikawa. So there's a lot of extra content besides the films.
The website is adfilmfest.com. Thanks so much, Kyle, for calling in and joining us.
Thanks, George, for having me. Talk to you soon. I hope you enjoy the film.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for modernist houses, and by Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Okay, Tom, wrap us up.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 7,500 significant modernist houses, and access 3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Carrie Cesarino researches guests while juggling 2 children, a bowling ball, a chainsaw, and dancing now the samba, it says here, with husband Adam. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Wright-inspired, historically significant, economic development friendly, not so well behaved, just needing a little loving edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Give me some love every day.